What's a red flag in the workplace that people frequently miss? Story 1. Anytime you have a boss tell you, "I'm a straight shooter," or "I'll never hesitate to tell it like it is," they will 100 never accept responsibility for their own failure. What they really mean by this is, "I will throw everybody else under the bus so fast." Story 2. Unclear job descriptions. Suddenly, this and that and this, etc. is part of your job, but we forgot to include it in the job description. Also, filling in for someone else who just left, eventually they won't hire for that position and you are stuck doing more than you can handle. Story 3. Constant employee turnover. Watch the help wanted ads online for your employer's name. I lived in a small town for decades where there was a local pizza place everyone always raved about, how the pizza was awesome, etc. It was a local tradition to have pizza there for special occasions, like high school, college graduation, etc. Just one of those amazing local places. The problem was, it was only amazing for the customers, not the employees. The owner was an immigrant who came to the US and started this business with his brother, and when the brother died, the current owner kept on going with it. Unfortunately, out of the two brothers, the one that died was the nice one. The remaining brother was a complete a-hole who would belittle, scream at, and throw things at his employees all day long. He never had a kind word for or about any of them, even if customers called him out on it. The help wanted ads in the newspaper were almost constant. He might as well have just purchased permanent ad space in the help wanted column. It was that frequent. He couldn't keep employees because he treated them so badly. What's amazing is that he was able to stay in business as long as he did. His treatment of his employees was apparently not enough to hurt the business. He retired and his nephew took over and was a far better employer than his uncle ever was. Story 4. The increase of minimum wage, but not the increase of those on a higher wage. I worked in a place where the higher paid employees actually ended up on the same minimum hourly wage after it didn't keep up with the wage increase for 3 years. Story 5. Getting hired with no real vetting or interview process. I'm not talking about the mom and pop store hiring little Johnny whom they've known since he was 3. Hiring warm bodies just to fill positions is not a good sign about their workplace culture. It means that either employees are considered super expendable or that they are having retention problems for other reasons. Story 6. For new starters, your manager schedules you for dozens of onboarding meetings with people you'll never interact with again. I've found it implies that they'll be both disorganized and micromanagers, which is the worst combination. Story 7. Faux enthusiasm. If your management makes regular initiatives to get everyone pumped, it's usually an indicator that you work in a soul-sucking hellhole and your company is only alive because your employees are too stubborn or too underskilled to find work elsewhere. If it's not a hellhole, then there isn't a need to get everyone pumped. But I might also add, if you have daily meetings that exceed 5 minutes or weekly meetings that exceed 45 minutes, then there's a pretty good chance you're working in a hellhole. Answer. In my last role, the manager scheduled a regular 2.5-hour catch-up of a bunch of departments together. We didn't even intersect in our work. We just happened to be under the same department head. That also doesn't include the 2 weekly catch-ups for my section and the weekly hour-long slightly larger area meeting, which again, we didn't even work together. Once they ended up all being scheduled on the same day for a torturous 5-hour slog. These weren't productive meetings. They all were literally just talking about what each section was up to. Our managers didn't even cancel any of them due to obvious overlap. They instead said we could discuss what had been discussed in the previous meetings. God, my head hurts thinking about it again. I lasted all of 5 months there, which is heroic considering my replacement only managed 5 weeks. Story 8. when everyone says, "It's just like a family here." At first it sounds warm and welcoming, but what they usually mean is blurred boundaries, guilt tripping instead of honest feedback, and an unspoken rule that you're expected to sacrifice personal time because we're all in this together. Families are great, but you don't get performance reviews from your uncle or Slack messages from your sister at 9 p.m. A healthy workplace acts like a team, not a sitcom. Story 9. Being told by admin that you're confrontational when all you did was complain about being shamed out by name on the workplace, WhatsApp, by office staff for doing something wrong that you didn't do, again and again. Story 10. You ask a question about their values in an interview, and they look at other awkwardly, then a long silence, and they say something that doesn't answer the question. So you follow up, and they just repeat exactly the same thing, then shut the interview down with, "Okay, we feel we have got enough information now." Had another potential employee tell me the purpose of business is to make money in responses to a question I asked about if they celebrated the wins. Story 11. One place I worked at had a beeping smoke detector when I went in for my interview, so I mentioned it. On the first day I worked, it was still beeping, and I quickly felt that the whole business was a bit of a shit show. I think I worked one more day before quitting, but the smoke detector was the first red flag. Story 12. Executive leadership unable to see beyond their own interests, area of focus. These are always the type to dig in and resist change in overall strategic direction. Once there is a critical mass of this type of thinking at the executive level, it sets in motion a long gradual decline of the business. Story 13. Family members of employees getting hired. This inevitably leads into direct reports being related, kids of senior management getting paid better than their more qualified peers, and information getting hoarded to keep it all secret. Story 14. When down in the warehouse, they've got a little fella driving the forklift. He can't see over the top. He's got great big platform shoes on so he can reach the pedals because of his little legs. Immediate red flag. Story 15. If the break room sucks. The worst jobs I've had, there was a table with a backless stool in a hallway closet or other extremely small space squished up against boxes or beside a loud machine under bright light that you had to share with another person, when they won't give any perks and you have to pay for everything. I was shocked working in franchise food places. You can't even have a snack like an old donut for free. Obviously, staff tried to sneak food, but that had raccoon vibes hiding in corners and it grossed me out. Makes me sad. Story 16. Poor work planning, no standards. One thing that keeps employees engaged and focused is having a clear-cut, practical work plan and deliverables, which should be the foundation for an annual review. People need to know what's expected of them and how they'll be reviewed. I've worked places where the work plan is just a suggestion. For example, one year my work plan accounted for 120 of my time and excluded extra things I was expected to do, e.g. blog posts. And I was told that's okay because it's just a general guideline. So then the annual review is essentially a vibe check, and work planning is a meaningless waste of time and you never know if you're succeeding. Perfect, no notes. Story 17. Nepotism. You will never be as good as their own family when it comes down to it. I've worked with too many people that had no business doing the work I do. They were only there because they were related to the owner. On the plus side, they are usually the first ones shit-canned when there is a buyout or merger. Story 18. When a company raises all their wages by several dollars per hour, like when Walmart went to 11 or when Target went to 15, it's because they treat people like shoot and everyone knows it. They raise the wage to get a flood of new applicants, hire a ton of new people, and treat them super nice for about 3 to 6 months like a love-bombing new boyfriend. Then the switch flips. They start cutting hours, demanding more and more work out of employees, and not replacing the ones who leave. Story 19. People who cannot be quiet. I will quit a job before I work with the nicest person who just can't seem to foo. It means that there's more talk than action going on. It's a distracting environment, and no one is going to correct it. Bye. Story 20. Also, if you lose out on 2 to 3 promotions, especially when you're perfectly qualified for the position, forget it. You're done there, and you'll never get promoted. At that point, it's time to bail. Story 21. While working at a terribly toxic workplace of over 200 people, we got a strange comment from the head boss. He said that in the parking lot, all those who parked by backing into the spaces were at-risk employees. Why? Because it showed they wanted nothing in the way when it was time to leave at the end of the day. After that meeting, many of us started parking in head first. We did this even though it was dangerous at the end of day, with all the speeders in the parking lot trying to get home ASAP. Story 22. Look at the decision-makers' offices and then the workers' office. Workers using reams of printer paper to prop up broken monitors. Executives with standing desks and treadmills. One can conclude the company doesn't invest in its employees. Story 23. Confusing coworkers with friends. Just because you are cordial with each other and friendly doesn't mean they give a fudge about you. If you wouldn't see yourself inviting them to your house, maintain your social distance. Story 24. I should have picked up this about IKEA, this feeling where it's like a cult of personality. Less about individuality, but about overall group or herd mentality. Walmart and some other businesses care about individual pursuits of ability to use personal experience. Story 25. I've worked for the same hotel chain for quite a while now, and about 3 years ago, I transferred to a location closer to home. At my previous place, there were several managers that had been working there for 10 or more years. In the new place, the longest-serving manager had 2 years on his resume. I'm back at my original place now. Story 26. I've considered someone offering you the job right after the interview to be a red flag. In my experience, it shows that they have the revolving door thing happening. The jobs I was applying for were not entrance level. Story 27. Recently, I had a new coworker who was just a little too ambitious for our small company. She would get asked to solve problem X, and to do so, she would come up with solution Y. She would then come to one of us to actually implement the changes she came up with individually. And when we told her they were bad solutions or would take a long time, she'd tell us, well, owner said you need to do it. The owner would never say that. I've known him for the better part of 2 decades, 16 of which as his employee. If something is a bad idea, he wants that properly explored. Another thing she would do is show a complete lack of accountability. If we would insist that solution Y was a bad idea, she would eventually say, "Don't look at me, it's manager's idea." But if there was no pushback, obviously it was hers. The best one was where she told everyone we were going to make pictures of all employees for on our website, despite me reminding her months earlier that you need consent for that. On top of not asking for content, she also had all kinds of wishes detailing what we could and couldn't wear, and that we should bring a change of clothes. On the day itself, though, it turned out that she had 0 plans for pictures. She figured someone else would decide what these pictures, that half of us wanted nothing to do with, were even going to be about. Story 28. When they tell you in the interview, the owner of the store, it was in the military. So if you're 1 minute late, you'll get written up. Went back to same store under different manager, I guess, for an interview a few weeks later, and the guy wanted me to wait 30 minutes because he was running behind schedule on his interviews. Story 29. A company where everyone is supposed to be nice to everyone in the name of culture. The problem is that to avoid confrontation, the politics becomes very toxic, and people become highly passive-aggressive. You would rather let people get away with lack of accountability than try to call them out and fix the problem. It's just a clusterfuck. Story 30. When the CEO says, "It's not about what the team wants, it's about what I want," or "rules for thee, but not for me" mentality. Manager expects you to be available 247, but they're frequently late or miss calls or meetings themselves. Story 31. The building or office seems run down. This is almost always a sign that while they are hiring, they are either undercapitalized and layoffs will happen soon, or they don't care about their employees at all. If you can help it, don't take a job from a major company that doesn't do maintenance to its property. Story 32. Listen to how they talk about past coworkers, anyone who no longer works there. When I started working for Fidelity, it seemed strange that every person who had left our company in history had been a dishonest criminal. Every past employee had been a liar, dishonestly concealing a job search, playing borderline illegal games because they were so greedy, and they left their coworkers high and dry, short-staffed with no warning. They dislike anyone who left the company voluntarily. The employees' many faults and sins became the top subject of discussion among managers and supervisors. A manager called our team into a meeting once to announce that they couldn't tell us why our supervisor had left, but his behavior had just been so inappropriate we wouldn't believe it. They couldn't tell us. In the hour that she ranted about how bad he was, she insinuated that he had stolen money, that he had stolen company secrets, that maybe he had relationships with women in the office, that we would all be shocked if we heard what he did. But we all knew already. He had criticized our CEO in a Teams message to another employee and was immediately called to HR and fired, but our manager wanted us to think he was a criminal. We had a years-long freeze on raises and promotions in my division. It was only through this brainwashing that they retained any employees by turning anyone who left and accepted another job into public enemy number 1 until the next person left. Story 33. Assuming that some of the women they work with have attitudes because they prioritize professionalism over friendliness. That person will think your work matters as much as you don't. Your contribution to anything they do will be considered irrelevant or an issue they took care of. Story 34. If everyone's too busy or feels guilty for taking time off, that's not dedication. That's burnout culture in disguise. It's one of those sneaky signs that the place might not actually respect boundaries or work-life balance, even if they say they do. And sure, sometimes it's just a crunch period, but if it's constant, that's a red flag waving at you. Story 35. In my experience, speeches about how you're free to finish the day when you want, but you're equally expected to put in more time when you still have work to do. I've worked in several offices and have only heard this speech in places where everyone's overwhelmed with work, and I had never seen someone leave early. Story 36. New employees starting on a permanent part-time position when others have been working a couple of years and still casual. Happened to me and some others. Workmate went and blew up on supervisor, and next thing we're getting offered permanent contracts. Story 37. The interview is either way too easy for the skills required, or they don't even test your skills and take your word for it. You'll end up working with morons for colleagues who would have been filtered out if they were interviewed properly. Story 38. There's a reason they're always hiring. Also, the TV show The Office is full of shoot. Workplace pranksters are not even slightly funny, make everyone miserable, and in an industrial setting can even get someone eliminated. Story 39. 1. If the manager appears to take care about its looks too much, there is the risk of dealing with a narcissist. 2. If the IT infrastructure is too old. 3. If the staff turnover is over 20 in office jobs. 4. If onboarding is non-existent. 5. If they talk about hard work and that money will flow later. 6. If HR acts like they are somewhat valuable. Story 40. Management treating themselves to meetings at nice restaurants, bars, and going on expensive group trips, while either the company is suffering or the employees are grossly underpaid. This is a red flag that could mean they are pocketing profits for themselves only or just plain stealing. Story 41. 1. When no one is ever sure who is doing what. 2. Companies where either people have been there forever or many people have only been there less than 2 years. 3. Any company owned by private equity LOL. Story 42. If the only challenges are dealing with the way the business is being run, the people around you, you aren't being intellectually challenged in a way that promotes growth. You are wasting daily energy at a job that may not be a good fit and can ultimately suffer from burnout. Story 43. When higher-ups start treating information about projects like currency, like telling the whole marketing team about the new marketing campaign that you're planning is not going to spoil and ruin it, but knowing about it might help us with other projects and avoid having to redo work we just did once it launches. Story 44. I'm always curious of the person who takes the last cup of coffee, assuming no one is watching. Do they leave a little bit in the pot, leave it empty, avoiding responsibility? Or do they rinse it out and yada yada? I'd say that right there would tell me a lot about someone. Story 45. These days, I ask about meeting frequency and what the hiring manager's beliefs on it are. Typically, great companies have incredibly infrequent and critically relevant meetings. Crappy companies will stress the value of meetings as being important for the team and have more of them. Story 46. A red flag in the workplace that people frequently miss is a lack of psychological safety where employees feel they can't speak up, ask questions, or admit mistakes without fear of embarrassment or punishment. This can show up subtly, such as leaders shutting down ideas without discussion, people avoiding asking for help, team members always agreeing with management, even when decisions are questionable, mistakes being hidden instead of addressed constructively. Over time, this creates a toxic culture where innovation stalls, accountability drops, and burnout increases. Because it's not always overt, many don't recognize it until the consequences surface. Story 47. Judgmental people that lack empathy seem to be more than not as I grow older. It's easy to spot who's more prone to racism, ignorance, and just a general lack of self-awareness. It's a constant thorn. Dodging people who don't bother with their turn signals, litter, talk trash. The only option is to ignore them. It's unfortunate that a lot of them are smart enough to be dangerous. Story 48. Former male elementary school teacher here. Gossip, cliques, and rumors run rampant in education, and you can quickly see who stopped growing in high school. The younger the grade they teach, the more Mean Girls-esque they get, almost as if they became teachers to convince themselves that they're not horrible people. They would freak out with literal tantrums, silent and loud, when I rejected them. If they were married, it was either to a huge jerk or to a spineless doormat. Don't get me wrong, I met lots of kind, intelligent, and genuinely wonderful people in education too. But I want to say, over half of elementary school staff I met at all the schools I worked at were like how I described above. Story 49. Similar but different blame culture. The last place I worked was insanely toxic and everyone pointed fingers. No one wanted to share info for fear of being blamed for minor mistakes. Minor meaning no real customer or business impact. Absolutely awful place. People turned over in droves, and if someone tenured left, they would blame all the issues of the department for the last year on them. I.e., Carrie used to handle this, so that's why all projects are over budget. I quit without another job lined up, and I definitely made the right choice. Story 50. Exactly. I'm on salary, a shoot one, of course, and got told I was supposed to do 48 a week. Suddenly oh no, we did say, you would probably have to do more like 50. No one said shoot to me about this on the interview. I dislike this job so much. I pray I find something else soon every single day. Story 51. I was at a toxic workplace and starting to feel the stress. One day we had a welcome the new guy call, and everyone said how long they'd been at the company. 4 people, including founder and his wife, had been there 4 years. Of the remaining 8, none had been there more than 6 months. Realizing that was my final clue to GTFO. Story 52. I'll one-up you. My first week at one of my jobs, I heard like 8 different people talking, shoot about my new direct boss behind his back, about 8 different issues. I didn't leave because I needed the money and thought maybe they were just having a bad spell. No. The bad spell was working for that boss. Story 53. So I know you mean a metaphorical door, but my office has a literal one, where you scan your card and it moves forward 180 degrees and lets you in. It's constantly malfunctioning, stopping and starting randomly, people backing up behind it, and even when it works properly, it's somewhat dehumanizing to shuffle slowly in a semicircle while briefly trapped in a glass cell. I dislike it. Story 54. Saw this firsthand about 20 years ago. I was tasked with training a newly promoted manager who hadn't been with the company too long. He casually mentioned what he made, about 3 more than me. So I excused myself and went right to the boss. Politely asked that I be brought to a minimum of that rate, if not more, for being trusted to train managers. He agreed on the spot, and it was in my next check. He was a good boss. I dislike to think with times and circumstances being different that anyone couldn't do this, but inevitably we have to look out for ourselves because no one will do it for you. Story 55. Happened to me in reverse. Me and this guy got hired at the same time. He told a vet our pay rate, just 10 HR, and she flipped out, 9 HR, and went to management. Almost quit, which would have been a massive loss. Then my manager pulled me aside asking if I told anyone how much I was getting paid. I said no, and this man proceeds to give me a $1 raise while the absolutely amazing vets got nothing. I'd been there like 2 weeks, and it was simply a bump for new hires, but it was seriously messed up. Fast forward a few years to COVID times, and I desperately needed a job, so I went back to that company. My coworker, who I had a lot more experience than, casually mentioned her pay rate under the assumption that I made more. Turns out she was making 4 IR more than me. I quit soon after. I should have known they weren't a good company when it happened the first time, but I was fresh out of high school and didn't know any better.